Hello and welcome to episode number 36 of the Hafey Digital Podcast, a show for creators, makers, and doers. My goal is to help you make to the max. My name is Ryan Hafey, and in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down my boxing photography post-processing workflow. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome to the Hafey Digital Podcast. I sound really loud in my headphones right now, and I'm not sure why that is. I guess it's turned the knobs there up a little bit. Anyway, I'm running a little bit behind today. Sorry for the late start. It's been a long day for a number of reasons, but we can get into that at another time. For now, if you're here with me, be sure to click that subscribe button wherever you happen to be watching or listening to this, and follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram and Twitter. Let's have a conversation over there after the podcast is done. Why not? Beverage of the week this week is not a traditional sparkling water beverage. No, today I'm just drinking a Coke Zero because I've earned it. Like I said, it's been a busy day, and I earned this drink today, so I'm going to have this. So a few things to talk about before we get into the boxing photography discussion. I feel like my mic levels are a little bit hot. What do we feel? How are we feeling out there? I did have to tweak a few things recently because I was using OBS to record for a different purpose. So if things are a little bit different or off than what they're used to, that would be why. But everything seems to be okay, right? Okay, cool. So let's talk before we get... Actually, the first thing we need to talk about is the sound of the week. We got to talk about the sound of the week. So last week's sound of the week was... Hold on. And as we all know, that is the sound of gaff tape being ripped, or opened and ripped. Gaff tape is amazing stuff, and if you don't have some, especially if you're into photography or video, you should get some. But the sound of the week for this week is... Now, excuse me. Bonus points on that one for being specific. There is... I'm trying to think if there's a way to give a hint about this one without giving it away. It's a common tool that photographers use that has kind of a catchy nickname. And if you can guess what that is, what's making that noise, you win absolutely nothing except for a pat on the back if I ever see you, because I don't know. But yeah, that's the sound of the week. So we'll talk about that one again at the end of the episode. By the way, you may notice a few different things here on the desk. I did some rearranging of the desk here. So last week I did the Hafey Digital Game Show, the first ever Hafey Digital Podcast Game Show, which was a lot of fun, and we're actually going to talk about it in a little bit. But what I was having to do, because I was using, let's see, there we go, I got the GoPro back. I was using this little Elgato Stream Deck here to help me kind of do some of the animations and things that were popping up on the screen. And then I was having to come all the way over here to press some of the sound effects on the soundboard. Aww. Things like that. So I'm kind of doing this, and then I'm over here doing this. And I've wanted to have my soundboard here anyway on this side, which you can now see here in the bottom corner there. But I figured it was time. So what I did, because I've got a monitor right here that here, we'll go back to this view again. You can see it out of frame. This monitor right here, which was initially standing on this thing here, which is just like a little organizer. You can probably see that better from this angle here. So yeah, just a little organizer, and the monitor was sitting on top of this. Now, I liked that because, it put the monitor up at the same level. Because this is a 1080 monitor, this is a 4K monitor. So it put the monitors up at the same level, which was nice because it was kind of side by side. That caused one major issue, which was it got in the way of the softbox. Because it was up higher, it was starting to hit here. And I thought, I just need to try and see if I'll like it with it just sitting flat on the desk. And I actually kind of prefer it. It's really, I'm showing you how I turn my head to look at the monitors now. Instead of going like this, I just have to go this. And it's really not that much difficult. This being over here, I kind of like, and then the ability to have my soundboard and my Elgato Stream Deck side by side here, since I use them frequently, and since I want to be talking towards the camera, this setup actually works quite well for me. So I'm good with this for now. I've been toying with the idea of getting a new monitor to replace both, which is like it's a ViewSonic, I forget the model number, but it's a 38-inch monitor, 4K wide, and then like 1440 tall. I don't know if I want to do that yet, because this one is full 4K resolution, and then this one here is just just kind of a simple cheap 1080 monitor, which I didn't really intend to use for anything other than just kind of, if I'm editing a video, to be able to put like my file explorer on this side, and obviously for this podcast, I have some screens here that I can pay attention to as I'm doing the podcast. So I don't know yet if I want to go as far as getting rid of both of these, because that's also going to introduce another issue, which is this will no longer be useful to me if I have a long monitor, because it won't be able to go above, and I don't know where I will put this. So I don't know. I haven't figured out what I want to do yet, but that's kind of what's going through my head there. But also, as far as, so that's the desk reorganization, and then you may be able to see I have some little lights here. It's just, I actually got the idea from my kids. Both of my daughters wanted for Christmas or something some of those LED light strips that you can put up in your room, and it comes with a little remote, and you can change the color and do all sorts of, if it works. Oh, it does. You can do all sorts of fun stuff. Turn it to white. I kind of like how that purple makes the red pop out. But the teal, that's interesting. Look at the color of the red sound foam. When you change it to a different color, when you change it to teal, it just completely changes the color of that red there. Maybe we go with a white. Yeah, that kind of looks better, I think. And then we'll have our teal accent back there still. But anyway, I only partly got these LED lights to look cool in this space. I think it adds a nice little accent, of course, but the real reason is that in this particular room, I've only got one light source, not including this, like just a light source if you want to come in and work out and things like that. There's a light back in that back corner, which is really the only light that's being used to light the whole room. So if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm working, that sometimes isn't bright enough. And then if I turn on this giant softbox, that ends up being too bright, and it's kind of, I can see it in my peripheral, and it ends up being not a pleasant work experience. So my thought was, well, we'll get some LED lights. We'll run them on the bottom of this shelf and then over the top of the shelf right above it. And that'll kind of give, you can't really see it back there because, well, I bet if I change it again, there you go. You can kind of see the light accenting behind the cameras there. But this will give me a little bit more light without being overbearing as I'm sitting here working at my station. And of course you can change it around. It's got certain settings to where it'll react to your voice and to music and things like that. So, pretty cool. But that's the latest updates to my my desk here. A little sip of Coke Zero. The other thing is just a quick update on the restoration we're doing here at the house. So last week, if you listened or watched last week's podcast, you may have heard some kind of noise in the background, some white noise, and that was coming from a dehumidifier, which is located in our kitchen because we had a water leak on our second floor, in our laundry room on the second story, and it filtered down into the ceiling on the first story. Lo and behold, we had to call a restoration company to come out and cut holes in the ceiling and dry up a bunch of stuff. luckily all that equipment is still out, although we're waiting for another company to come in and fix the drywall and put new baseboards in and fix the carpet and stuff like that. So we still don't have laundry, waiting on that. So I had to go to the laundromat the other day, which is something I haven't had to do for a long time. But it's actually kind of nice because I brought my laptop and I could just kind of get some work done while I was there. But yeah, so we're waiting on that. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get someone to call and come over and take a look and get things started. But that's the restoration update. But at least we don't have any annoying fan noise in the background there, so that's cool. And then the game show. So I wanted to talk about the game show that we did last week. And again, in case you missed it, the game show was basically, I don't know, I just had this concept. I wanted to invite creators on and quiz them about themselves. So it's kind of like the first pilot test run. I did it with my wife, who has a YouTube channel, which I have helped her kind of with content over the years. We actually started together, and then she kind of took it and turned it into like a more of a vlog channel. But figured it would make sense for me to go in and it'd be easy to find some questions for it. It'd be a good pilot episode, get my wife involved. And it was actually a lot of fun. I was a little nervous about it. I didn't know how exactly it was going to go and if it was going to go super smoothly. But it ended up going surprisingly well. But, let's see if I can go in here. Nope. Oh, no, I still have some things turned on. There we go. Questions, turn those off. I didn't set this up beforehand, if you can tell. But yeah, so this was kind of the skin of it. In the middle, I would bring up questions. These were your questions. Again, all this is done using this, in this view, you can't really see it, but the Elgato Stream Deck over here. And, maybe I can just show you here. Oh, the cable's not long enough, and I almost knocked over my Coke, which would have been bad. But yeah, I would pull up the questions. If she got it right, she would see this. If she got it wrong, she would see this. And then if she got the answer right, you could see this little green check mark that's going in box number 1. If she got it right, she would get a green check box. If she got it wrong, she would get a red or check box. She would get a red X if she got it incorrectly. And yeah, we had a lot of fun. Uh-oh, I'm going backwards. There we go. So she ended up getting 5 right out of 10. Not bad for a first try. So the goal now is really to just get more people to do it. That's what I want to do. I want to reach out to some creators. If you know anybody who would be good to be on this, let me know, and I'll do some research and come up with some trivia questions, and we'll have a good old time. So I don't foresee that being something I do every single podcast, but occasionally, just to switch it up a little bit. Why not? Okay. So that is it really for my updates. So I think I'm going to go ahead and jump now into the main topic for this episode, which again is editing live my boxing photos. So what I did is I picked one of my photos from a show that I shot. This one's actually back in 2018. If there are any boxing fans out there, you may recognize the fighters and or the fight shown in this image I'm about to pull up here. Now, I'll be using Photoshop for this. When I'm editing photos on Fight Night, I use Lightroom, but I'll be using Camera Raw within Photoshop to do all my edits here, and all those same settings and adjustments can be done in Lightroom. So it's essentially the same thing. It's just in Lightroom, it's quicker to apply all of your edits to multiple photos at once. But since we're only doing one, I can kind of show you what that workflow looks like here. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the settings that I use. I'll go over them briefly, but because I did a whole video on how what my settings are, which is probably due for an update soon. But I have it linked in the description. Something like 7 crucial tips for killer boxing photography. I did that video a while back. For this shot here, actually, It's if you didn't know, if you use Camera Raw or if you use Lightroom, you can see in most cases what settings were used when shooting photos. So for this particular image here, it was shot at ISO 3200 with a focal length of 70 millimeters on a 24-70 lens, f3.2 aperture, and 1/1000th of a second. And yeah, I typically, when I shoot boxing photography, I typically shoot almost exclusively with a 24-70 or 24-105 f4 if I can. I don't often have two camera bodies with me. Otherwise, if I did, I would probably have a second camera body with a full frame sensor and have a 70-200 on it just to get those occasional really tight shots. But yeah, that was kind of it for settings. So let's just jump into this. We'll do that. Put me in the corner. Perfect. So this fight, like I said, was from 2018, I believe. This is Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios. Danny Garcia ended up winning this fight via impressive knockout. So that was pretty cool. But so what I will typically do towards the beginning of a fight night, obviously, if you're familiar with boxing at all, you may know that there's usually a long fight card with, you know, upwards of 12 or so fights. Depends on the fight card. There could be more, there could be less. And I'll usually go and shoot a couple of the early fights that, you know, maybe I don't need the photos for that fight. I'll just go get some test shots to get my exposure settings in correctly. And then I'll come in, put them in the computer, and tweak a couple of them to get the settings the way that I want, and then I can save my edits as a preset. Because when you're shooting boxing, if you're just shooting the ring, in most cases you're not going to be changing any of your camera settings because you're working with the same lighting situation pretty much at all times. So if you don't change, if you're shooting in manual and you don't change the settings that you're using, then you can, in most cases, use presets from one photo onto another. So I'll get my initial edit, I'll save that preset, and then later on in the night, it makes my editing easier. I shoot everything in RAW. I know, shout out to Mikey Williams, top ranked boxing photographer who shoots exclusively, well, I don't know exclusively, but he prefers to shoot in JPEG, which I think he's crazy for, but he does it and his shots look great. I've tried it and I just couldn't get into it. But yeah, so I shoot in RAW. So having a preset and being able to apply that preset to multiple photos at the same time is a huge time saver, especially when you're rushing to, you know, get back from your computer up to the apron and all that type of stuff. Fight nights are very high energy, very fast paced, so you got to be willing to move quickly. Let's see here. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Perfect. So all right, so what I would typically do in this case is lock in my white balance and exposure first typically. So I'm going to scroll up to the top here, and I know it may be tough to see some of the settings, but I'll talk through these as I go. Now, just looking at this photo, I can tell right off the bat that it's quite a bit, it's quite warm. So I'm going to grab the little white balance dropper here, and I might come to an area where, let's try here on his belt. That actually looks pretty good, maybe a little on the cool side. I'll just try to find a couple different neutral areas, and I'll click around. Sometimes I'll bring a white balance card, but not very often. But in this case, I think probably this area on, let's try one more here. I think I'm going to go back to that. So I think I like this a little bit better. And if you hit this sort of backslash button, you can see the before and after. So this is way warm. And this one, just maybe slightly on the cool side. I might warm it up just a skosh. There we go. But I think that looks pretty good. Next, I might come down here to the curves a little bit. And just ever so slightly kind of manipulate these a little bit. I don't want to go too dark. Let's see. There we go. Something like that, just to kind of play with the contrast a little bit. And then next up, I'll go up to some of these basic adjustments. Oftentimes, I'll bring the highlights down a little bit. And pro tip, if you hold the Alt key and you move it around, you can kind of see where your image is clipping in some areas, where you see all these colorful areas there. Bring this back again. Or where you see kind of the white and yellow and red. That's where you're starting to clip some of your highlights. So you just want to make sure that you're not getting a ton of that in your frame. I'll start with the whites here. I might bring the whites up until I clip in some areas. Not too high, because then you can really blow it out, but I will typically pull it up just a little bit. And then I'll come down with the highlights a little bit. And I'm usually okay with there being some overexposed areas, like you saw kind of on top of his glove there. There was a little bit of clipping. I'm not too worried about that, and if we want to later, we can come back and kind of fine tune that. So let's see, play with what I'll usually do is I'll kind of get the highlights. I'll look at this view and bring the highlights down, and then if I come back to this how it is right now looks a little bit on the dark side to me, so I'm going to bring the highlights back up. And again, if you're listening to the audio only version of this, definitely one you're going to want to check out on YouTube. The link to this will be in the description below of the audio version. But I'll try to talk through the settings and why I do them, so you have an idea. So anyway, highlights. I'm liking it about right there. Now, when it comes to the blacks and the shadows, the dark areas of the image, I kind of teeter-totter as far as how I like to set those. So sometimes, again, you can use the Alt key with this to see where you're losing data or detail in the dark areas. Sometimes I like to bring the blacks up quite a bit, actually. Now, typically people will bring down the blacks and then bring up the shadows to kind of bring out more detail. And I find that sometimes that can give almost a bit of a plasticky look at times. So there are times, depending on the lighting situation, where I might bring the blacks up a little bit and then bring the shadows down. So if we look at that versus, say, bringing the blacks down and bringing the shadows up. Another thing, too, with bringing the shadows up is that you're going to start to introduce a lot more. You're going to bring out some of the shadow areas in the crowd. And really, when it comes to boxing photos, and again, it's all personal preference, but I want the photo to be focused on the fighters. I don't want there to be too much distraction going on in the background. So in that case, I will, I've started to lean more towards bringing the blacks up and bringing the shadows down, because you can kind of see the difference there, how it sort of mutes the background a little bit. So I'm kind of liking where this is, maybe, and a lot of this is really just fine-tuning, making small, little subtle adjustments. I'm kind of liking where we're at now. I'm going to play with the mids a little bit. And you really don't have to tweak things as much as you might think. All right, so basic adjustments are good for now. I may come back and touch those up a little bit. I like to add maybe just a few notches of texture and a few of, and up to between like 5 and 10 on the clarity scale, just to kind of bring it out. I mean, clarity, if you're taking portraits and things like that, maybe not the best idea, but when you're going for that sort of grungy, sporty look, clarity can bring a lot of the detail out. You just don't want to go overboard, because if you bring up your clarity too high, then you get something that looks like that, which to some people can be kind of cool and stylistic, but like if you want to maintain some sort of natural look to it, I would suggest not going too high there. So I'm going to bring it up to about +10. And then I'll also throw in some dehaze. Oftentimes on these fight nights, they'll pump some fog into the air, and it will create a haze, especially with those bright lights. You'll start to see some of that light, or the haze from the light bouncing off the fog. So dehaze will kind of tone that down a little bit, while also adding a little bit of contrast. Now, again, you don't want to go too crazy on the dehaze, because it will really ramp things up. And look, when you turn in the other direction, it's not even cool. So again, very subtly, I might go up to plus +7 here. Looks good to me. So let's, just where we're at right now, let's go back to the beginning. Oops. Why aren't you showing? No, work for me. Oh, there we go. Original. And after some initial edits. I'm even going to, let's see, I'm going to bring up exposure ever so slightly, +0.1, just to brighten it up overall. Let's see, after this, oftentimes what I will do, the colors look pretty good in this as they are, but I've kind of gotten into the habit of, what I'll do is I'll crank my vibrance way up, and then I'll bring down the saturation just a little bit. So I don't know if I can see my, so that's one thing and I'm not used to in Camera Raw is going back and looking at the history of my edits. I don't see them. So we're just gonna have to pretend. So yeah, so Vibrance will kind of raise up all of the colors, generally speaking, at this, towards the same level. Like where saturation, let's say if your reds are really saturated and your yellows aren't that saturated, and you turn up your saturation, it's just going to bump the saturation of those colors up at the same proportion to one another. Whereas Vibrance is going to kind of try to even them out a little bit. So saturation's like this, Vibrance is like this, if that makes any sense at all. So I find that if you can kind of do that, bring up the Vibrance, bring down the saturation a little bit, even if you feel like you're a little bit undersaturated, then you can come back up to the top here and add a little bit of contrast. And adding contrast tends to bring out more color. So you can kind of have that sort of high contrasty, semi-desaturated look going on, which I'm kind of partial to. So that's color. We're going to play with colors a little bit more here shortly. Sharpening, I typically don't do a whole lot with sharpening, but what I will do sometimes is, you know, sharpening is, for me, by default, is typically set to around 40, radius of 1. What I will do, though, is hold the Alt key and then bring my mask up. And what I'm trying to do here, because you can see when masking is all the way down here, you can see all that noise that's going on in the background. That basically means that, you know, any background noise in the dark areas is having sharpening applied to it. But if you keep turning the masking up, then you're no longer sharpening that background, and instead you're just focusing on the sweat and on the fighters and their skin, and you're ignoring the stuff in the background. So I'm going to bring masking up to, in this case, about 48. And the noise reduction, because we are shooting at ISO 3200, we do have some noise in the background. It's not that apparent here, but you can kind of see it. Like if you look at some of these lights and things like that, you can kind of see it there. So noise reduction, I typically don't like to go over 20. Plus, you know, if you go too high in the noise reduction, that's when everything just kind of starts looking like an oil painting. So I'm going to bring it down to about right there, maybe 16. And I'm not going to play too much with the detail and the contrast on that. Next up, let's go down to HSL. I might play with luminance a little bit, possibly raising up the luminance in the oranges just to kind of make the skin tones pop out a little bit more. Saturation, I may also, depending on how I'm feeling, I may boost the oranges, the saturation on the oranges just a little bit, again, to kind of get that skin tone to pop out a little bit. Sometimes if I feel like I like where the skin tones are, in correlation to, say, you know, their gloves or anything else going on in the scene, I might bump those up and then come up and bring the saturation up at the top down just a little bit. But I kind of like this here. And then what else? Next, I'll go down to split toning. I like to, in the shadows, toss in a little bit of teal. What I'll do is I'll bring the shadows, the shadow value to about 212 under split toning, and then bump the saturation all the way up to 100 just to kind of see what that shade of blue is going to look like. And I kind of like to get right in the middle between the sort of teal and blue area, which is about, what, 209? Let's see. Not 205 in this case. And then I'll bring the saturation back down. And then to counteract that a little bit, I will typically throw a little bit of orange into the highlights again. Throw the saturation all the way up so you can kind of see what shade you're working with. And I'm at 42, and then I'll bring it down. I like that. And you can kind of turn the split toning on and off. It's usually pretty subtle, but again, adding, it sort of goes back to that whole cinematic thing of adding teal, that sort of teal and orange look. If you add a little bit of teal color or blue into the shadows, it's going to make your orange skin tones pop out a little bit more. So I try to do that subtly to where it's not super noticeable. And then I'll go and play with the balance here. So, I might move it up and down just to see where I like. And I think I like it right about 35 or so. You can turn that off, turn it on. Super subtle, but it's there. And those little tweaks can help. Next up, optics. By default, I typically always turn on to remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. Geometry, no, I don't typically do anything there. Effects, vignetting, sometimes I might add a little vignette, just again to bring that focus in on the fighters. But in this case, because there's already a lot of dark around the outside, I'm not going to do that. So we're just going to leave that blank. Calibration, sometimes it's fun to play with these sliders a little bit. If you go to red primary, you can adjust the look of the skin tones a little bit. If the skin tones aren't exactly where you would like them, you can play around with these areas. But I don't know that I want to do that in this case. And then finally, nope, I didn't want to do that. I'm trying to press R to crop, but because that's what you would press in Lightroom, but apparently that rotates it in Camera Raw. But anyway, so let's look at the before. Come on. Okay, there we go. Before, pretty high contrast, very dark darks and very dark blacks and shadow areas, definitely on the warm side. And then when you turn that on, on the after photo, is a little bit more, you know what, I might even come down here in the curves, add a little bit more contrast in the darks. Because I was noticed that I was in that kind of borderline crushed black look. And I might even come back and bring down the highlights just a little bit more. Okay. A lot of this just really comes down to taste and personal preference and tweaking and really getting it where you want. So I think that looks pretty good. And then if you wanted to get real fancy with it, you could go in and grab your brush, maybe throw up some clarity on that, and come up here and emphasize some of this sweat that's flying around. And if you're doing it in sort of these dark areas, you can kind of just, it's even going to pull out these little light rays that are coming out, look kind of cool. So you can emphasize those a little bit with a little bit of clarity. And that, it might be a little hot on the clarity there. There we go. And that is how I would edit a boxing photo. And then I would save the preset for this. Also now that I'm looking at it, it looks a little bit, oh boy, how do I go back? How do I go back? I need to go back. It looks a little bit on the green side. So there we go. I'm going to bring the tint up just slightly. There we go. I like that. Before, after. Before, after. Very nice. And that's it. That's how I edit my boxing photos. Let's see, we got a couple notifications here. Cool. Very nice. So I hope that was helpful to some of you. From here, you can just go and open, and then you can save your JPEG however you would like. And you've got yourself a nice and fancy boxing photo. Very cool. So that's it for that. Last thing we got to do is reveal the sound of the week. And the sound of the week, again, was... So that is the sound. Put it this way: if you're new, when you first start out in photography, there's usually specific lenses that you get kind of earlier that people tell you, go get this lens, practice with this lens, and start there. For me, my first camera was the Canon T3i, the Rebel, and my first lens was the Nifty 50, the Canon 50 millimeter f1.8. It's like a $100 or $200 lens. It's one of the two. It's a super cheap lens, definitely not for video, and it's got a loud focus motor, which is what you're hearing in this week's sound of the week. So that is the sound of the Nifty 50 trying to focus and just not nailing it, not getting it in. So if you've ever used a Nifty 50, especially on a Canon camera, the cheap Nifty 50, you've heard that sound on multiple occasions. But that is the sound of the week, Canon Nifty 50. Hey, if you're still here with me and you haven't done so already, please click that subscribe button wherever you happen to be watching or listening, and follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram and Twitter. But for now, I'm going to call this one done. So until next time, keep on creating, making, and doing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.